Ethan stared at the shredded remains of his only suit. It lay on the bed not as a piece of clothing, but as a casualty, a declaration of war written in sliced wool in severed seams. The charcoal fabric, which he had so carefully pressed just an hour before, was now a tattered mammalian mess. The jacket was bifurcated, its lapels hanging on by a few defiant threads. The trousers were even worse, rendered into a series of disconnected rings, like a failed magic trick. It was a methodical, vicious act. Not a tear of passion, but a dissection. His wife Clara stood by the doorway, a pair of gleaming silver scissors held loosely in her hand. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a cool, unnerving certainty. She looked at the ruined suit, then at Ethan's stunned face, and a small, tight smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a surgeon who had just removed a tumor, convinced of the righteousness of the incision. "Don't look so shocked, Ethan," she said, her voice as crisp and sterile as a hospital corridor. "I did you a favor. You can't possibly go to the Aperture Gala looking like that." She gestured vaguely at the suit's remains, her distaste palpable. "It's a 10-year-old suit from a department store. My father will be on the main stage tonight. My brother and I will be at the head table. We can't have you embarrassing us. It's a matter of standards." Ethan said nothing. His mind, usually a swift and ordered place, was moving with the slow, thick viscosity of cooling lava. He looked at the scissors in her hand, the same ones he used to open letters in packages in his home office. He looked at her face, the face he had loved, the face he had woken up next to for 5 years, and saw a stranger. A beautiful, polished stranger who had just performed an act of profound cruelty and called it a favor. She thought he was a mid-level financial consultant, a man of modest means and even more modest ambition. She thought his world was small, bound by spreadsheets and quiet, unassuming competence. She and her family, her bombastic, status-obsessed father Richard, and her snide, entitled brother Marcus, had cultivated this image of him, nurturing it with condescending remarks and backhanded compliments. For 2 years he had endured it all with a quiet, unreadable patience. He had weathered the family dinners where his job was subtly mocked, the holidays where his gifts were politely set aside, the constant, grinding assumption that he was lucky to have married into their orbit. He had endured it for Clara. But Clara was no longer a shield. She had become the blade. What Clara didn't know, what her father and brother could not possibly fathom in their self-imposed bubble of arrogance, was that Ethan wasn't just a guest at the Aperture Gala. He wasn't trying to fit in. The company, Aperture Inc., a titan of technological innovation worth billions, the very entity her father had dedicated the last decade of his life to climbing, was his. He had founded it in his late 20s, built it from a concept sketched on a napkin into a global powerhouse. He had stepped back from public life years ago, appointing a trusted CEO and preferring to guide his creation from the shadows, under a different, simpler surname he'd taken for his private life. He was the silent king in the castle they were all so desperate to enter. Tonight was supposed to be his quiet return, a night to honor the team he'd built, a night her father, Richard, was banking on for a career-defining promotion. Ethan looked from the suit to his wife's unyielding expression. The hurt was a deep, physical ache in his chest, but beneath it, something else was crystallizing, a cold, hard clarity. The scales had not just fallen from his eyes, they had been shattered. He had made excuses for her family. He had believed her silence during their insults was a struggle, not an endorsement. He had been wrong. Within the next 8 hours, her world, and the world of her arrogant family, would be dismantled. Not with rage or with shouting, but with the quiet, devastating weight of the truth. They thought he didn't have a suit to wear. They had no idea he owned the building. We've all felt underestimated at some point, haven't we? Pushed aside, dismissed, or judged unfairly. It's a feeling that can curdle in your soul. If you know what that feels like, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let us return to that silent bedroom where a war had just been declared and only one person in the room knew the true stakes. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Ethan finally broke it, his voice shockingly calm, devoid of the anger Clara had clearly been expecting. "You shouldn't have done that, Clara," she scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Oh, please, Ethan, don't be so dramatic. It's a piece of cloth. I'll buy you a new one tomorrow. Something better. My father gave me his credit card. He said to get you something respectable, finally." The insult was layered, a masterclass in condescension. It implied he couldn't afford a good suit, that he needed her father's charity, and that his current state was not respectable. It was the family's entire philosophy distilled into a single, poisonous offer. Ethan's gaze flickered to a simple, leather-bound briefcase on the chair in the corner. Inside it was a slim, unassuming folder. And inside that folder was a single, embossed card. It wasn't a credit card. It was an access card. An all-access key to every floor, every office, every laboratory in the Aperture Tower, including the penthouse suite he maintained but had not visited in years. The symbolic object of his hidden power. He had brought it home this afternoon, a quiet preparation for the evening. He hadn't anticipated this. He slowly walked over to the bed and picked up one of the severed pieces of the jacket's sleeve. The fabric was of good quality, a fine merino wool he had chosen himself a decade ago. It had been a gift to himself after closing his first major venture, before Aperture was even a dream. It wasn't just a suit, it was a milestone, a symbol of his own journey, one he had never bothered to share with her because he thought their love existed outside of such metrics. "This suit had meaning to me," he said, his voice a low murmur. He was not speaking to her anymore, but to himself, cataloging the grievance. "It was the first truly fine thing I ever bought for myself, with my own money, from my first success." Clara rolled her eyes, the gesture so dismissive it was almost theatrical. "Ethan, we don't have time for a trip down memory lane. The gala starts in 3 hours. The limo will be here soon. What are you going to do? Are you even going to come?" The question was laced with hope. It was clear she would prefer he didn't. He let the piece of fabric fall from his fingers. He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that wasn't the familiar, gentle patience she had always taken for weakness. It was a stillness, a depth she couldn't read. It was the placid surface of a very, very deep lake. It made her, for just a fleeting second, feel a prickle of fear. "Yes," he said, his voice even. "I'm going." He walked past her, out of the bedroom, leaving her standing with the scissors in the wreckage. She shook her head, the flicker of doubt extinguished by a fresh wave of irritation. He was being difficult, that's all. Sulking. He would get over it. He always did. Her father was right. Ethan needed a stronger hand. He needed to be pushed to be better, for her sake. She was helping him. She was sure of it. Downstairs, Ethan walked into his small home office. He closed the door, the click of the latch a sound of finality. He sat at his desk and looked out the window at the manicured suburban street. It was a life he had chosen, a quiet cocoon to insulate himself from the pressures of the world he had built. He had thought it was a sanctuary. He now saw it was a cage, one whose bars he had mistaken for the arms of an embrace. He had wanted a partner, not an audience. He had wanted love, not a project to be managed and improved. The humiliation didn't burn, it clarified. It stripped away all the sentimentality, all the hopeful interpretations, and left only the cold, hard framework of his marriage. It was a structure built on a faulty foundation, on a lie. Not his lie about his wealth, but her lie about her love. Her love was conditional. It was contingent on appearances, on status, on the approval of her father. He opened his briefcase and took out the folder. He slid the black, unmarked keycard from its sleeve. He ran his thumb over the smooth, cool plastic. The quiet before the storm. The gala wasn't just a party anymore, it was a reckoning, and he would arrive perfectly dressed. The weeks leading up to the gala had been a crescendo of petty humiliations, each one a note in a symphony of disrespect composed by Richard and Marcus and conducted with Clara's silent complicity. It began, as it often did, around the polished mahogany of her parents' dining table. The Aperture Gala is the event of the year, Richard had announced 2 months prior, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. He had the booming, self-important voice of a man who believed every word he spoke was a pearl of wisdom. It's not just a party, it's a statement. The entire industry will be there. The board, the top executives, everyone who matters. He shot a pointed look at Ethan, who was quietly eating his salmon. It's a shame they have to invite all the rank and file too. It lowers the tone, but I suppose it's good for morale. Marcus, ever his father's echo, chimed in with a smirk. Don't worry, Dad. They keep the junior consultants and analysts corralled near the back, away from the important people. Ethan will probably find some friends there. Ethan didn't rise to the bait. He simply took a sip of water, his placid demeanor a canvas onto which they painted their own assumptions of his inadequacy. He could feel Clara shift uncomfortably beside him. A small, almost imperceptible movement. It was her tell. She knew the comment was a jab at her husband, but she said nothing. Her silence was a choice, a small betrayal that, over time, had accumulated into a mountain of unspoken resentments. Later that week, Marcus had called Ethan under the guise of asking for financial advice, a ruse he often used to subtly probe and mock Ethan's career. Hey Ethan, quick question, he'd said, the sound of traffic in the background suggesting he was calling from his car. I'm thinking of investing in a small tech startup. You know, something with real growth potential, not like those big stagnant corporations. You must see a lot of that in your line of work, right? Just shuffling other people's money around in safe, boring funds? There's value in stability, Marcus, Ethan had replied, his voice even. He was looking at a live feed of Aperture's global server performance on his secondary monitor, a network so complex and dynamic it made Marcus's startup ambitions look like a child's lemonade stand. Yeah, I guess, Marcus had sighed, the condescension dripping from his tone. But some of us want to build things, you know? Make a real impact, like Dad. He's dedicated his life to Aperture. That company is his legacy. Ethan had nearly choked on the irony. His legacy. Richard was a competent senior manager in the logistics division, a man who had done his job well, but had never had a single innovative idea. He was a caretaker of a small part of the empire, not its architect. Your father is a dedicated employee, Ethan had said carefully, the words chosen to be both true and non-confrontational. He's more than that, Marcus had snapped, defensive. He's the heart and soul of that place. And after the gala, when they announce his promotion to senior vice president, everyone will finally see it. After the call, Clara had come into his office. That was Marcus on the phone, she'd said, her tone preemptively defensive. He told me he was asking for your advice. It's sweet that he looks up to you. Ethan had turned from his screen to look at her. Is that what he's doing, Clara? Or was he telling me his father is the heart and soul of the company? He caught himself just in time. She'd waved a dismissive hand. Oh, you know how they are. They're just proud. And they worry about me, about us. They want to see you be more ambitious. They think you're capable of so much more. It was their favorite justification. Their cruelty wasn't cruelty, it was motivation. Their insults weren't insults, they were expressions of concern. And she, his wife, was their willing translator, softening the blows while ensuring the poison was still delivered. It was after that conversation that Ethan had made a decision. The quiet life, the life of Ethan Miller, the unassuming consultant, had served its purpose. It had given him anonymity and peace, but it had also acted as a distorted mirror, reflecting a version of himself he no longer recognized, and it had revealed a fatal flaw in the foundation of his marriage. The next day, he drove to a discreet bank in the city center, one that catered to high-net-worth individuals who valued privacy above all else. He was greeted by the branch manager not as Mr. Miller, but as Mr. Vance. He was led to the vault, a gleaming wall of stainless steel. He accessed his safe deposit box. It was mostly empty, save for a few documents in a small velvet pouch. He didn't take the documents, he took the pouch. Inside was a key, not a physical key, but a thin black card made of a dense, unidentifiable polymer. It was cool to the touch. It bore no markings, no logo, no name. It was utterly anonymous. Yet it was the master key to his entire empire. It was a physical manifestation of his true identity, a symbolic object representing the power he kept hidden. He took the key card and placed it in the slim folder inside his briefcase. He didn't need it for access. His identity was coded into every security system he had built. But he took it for another reason. It was a tangible reminder, a focal point. He would keep it with him. He had a feeling the time was coming when its symbolic weight would be more important than its function. As he drove home, back to the quiet suburban street, and the woman who believed he needed her father's charity to buy a suit, he felt a profound sense of melancholy. He had wanted a life partner to share his quiet world, not a business partner to impress with his loud one. He had hidden his wealth not as a test, but because he wanted to be loved for who he was, not for what he had. The irony was devastating. In his attempt to find a love that transcended status, he had married a woman for whom status was everything. The gala was no longer just an event, it was becoming a crucible. The final family gathering before the gala was a Sunday brunch a week before the event. It was held at Richard and his wife Eleanor's house, a large, ostentatious home filled with furniture that was expensive but tasteless. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and self-congratulation. Richard was in his element, holding court in the center of the living room with a glass of champagne in his hand. He was practicing his speech, not the official one he would give if, when, in his mind, he was promoted, but the unofficial one he was giving to his captive family audience. "It's about a culture of excellence," he boomed, pacing in front of the unlit fireplace. "Aperture didn't become a global leader by accepting mediocrity. It demands the best, from its executives, its managers, right down to the people who clean the windows. You have to look the part, act the part, be the part." As he spoke, his eyes swept over Ethan, who was sitting quietly on a sofa, nursing a cup of coffee. The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Ethan was mediocrity personified. He was the window cleaner of the family. Eleanor, a woman whose personality had long been subsumed by her husband's, nodded enthusiastically. "That's so true, dear. Appearances are everything. It's why we had the driveway repaved. It's the first thing people see." Marcus, leaning against the mantelpiece, smirked. "Exactly. You can't show up to a gunfight with a knife. And you can't show up to the Aperture Gala in an off-the-rack suit." He winked at his sister. "Right, Clara?" Clara, who was arranging a platter of canapes, flinched almost imperceptibly. "Marcus, stop it." Her protest was weak, a token gesture. She didn't look at Ethan. She couldn't meet his eyes. Ethan remained silent, his posture relaxed. He was an anthropologist observing a strange, primitive tribe, fascinated by their rituals and their bizarre social hierarchy. He saw the network of insecurities that held their arrogance aloft. Richard's desperate need for validation, Marcus's pathetic attempt to ride his father's coattails, Eleanor's fear of being judged, and Clara, caught in the middle, choosing to align herself with the perceived strength of her family rather than the quiet, unknown quantity of her husband. He took a slow sip of his coffee. The warmth spread through his chest, a stark contrast to the icy certainty solidifying in his mind. He was watching a performance, a play that had been running for years. He was the only one in the room who knew the final act was about to be rewritten. Later, as they were getting ready to leave, Richard pulled Clara aside. Ethan, standing by the door, could overhear their hushed, urgent conversation. "Can't be serious, Clara. That old thing he wears? He'll be a laughingstock. We'll be a laughingstock," Richard hissed. "I've talked to him, Dad. He's just stubborn," Clara whispered back, her voice strained. "Then you need to be more persuasive. This is the most important night of my career. I will not have it tarnished by your husband's lack of ambition. Do something about it. For the family." Ethan pretended not to hear. He simply waited by the door, his hands in his pockets, the picture of patience. When Clara finally joined him, her face was a mask of strained cheerfulness. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice too bright. "Whenever you are," he said softly. The drive home was silent. Ethan drove, his hands steady on the wheel. Clara stared out the passenger window, her jaw tight. The unspoken command from her father hung in the air between them, a toxic cloud. Do something about it. Ethan knew with a chilling premonition that she would. She would obey. Her loyalty had been tested, and she had made her choice. That evening, after Clara had gone to bed, Ethan went into his office. The house was quiet. He sat in the dark for a long time, the glow of his monitor casting a blue light on his face. He wasn't angry. The feeling was something deeper, more profound. It was grief. Grief for the marriage he thought he had, for the woman he thought he loved. He picked up his phone and made a call. It was late in London, but he knew she would be awake. The phone was answered on the first ring. "Amelia," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The meek, unassuming tone he used with Clara's family was gone. This was the voice of a man accustomed to being heard, to being obeyed. "Ethan," came the crisp, professional reply from Amelia Sterling, the CEO of Aperture Inc., and one of the few people in the world who knew his secret. "I was hoping you'd call. Everything is set for the gala. Your introduction is scheduled for 9 p.m., just before the keynote." Ethan looked at the closed door of his office. He could hear the faint sound of the television from the living room, where Clara was now unwinding. "Amelia," he said slowly, "we need to make a change to the program." There was a pause on the other end. "A change?" "Ethan, the media has already been briefed on the schedule." "I know. This is important." He took a breath. "I want you to add a segment to the opening remarks. A special presentation on the subject of corporate integrity and ethics." Amelia was silent for a moment, processing. She was brilliant, and she knew him well enough to understand that there was always a deeper strategy at play. "And who will be the subject of this presentation?" she asked carefully. Ethan's eyes drifted to the briefcase in the corner, the one containing the black keycard. "Let's just say it will be an educational moment for some of our senior management," he said. "And Amelia, make sure the cameras have a clear shot of the main family table for Richard Davenport. I want his reaction to be well documented." "Consider it done, Ethan," she said, a note of understanding, and perhaps a hint of steel in her voice. "I'll see you on Saturday." He hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair. The gears were now in motion. The quiet, methodical machinery of consequence had been switched on. Richard was expecting a promotion. Marcus was expecting to bask in reflected glory. Clara was expecting her husband to either fall in line or be left behind. They were all about to be profoundly, irrevocably surprised. He felt no pleasure in it, only a grim sense of necessity. Some lessons, he knew, could not be taught. They had to be experienced. The day of the gala arrived, cloaked in an atmosphere of thick, palpable tension. The air in the house crackled with it. For Clara and her family, it was the electric hum of anticipation. For Ethan, it was the static charge of the quiet before a lightning strike. The morning was a flurry of activity. Eleanor, Clara's mother, arrived shortly after breakfast, her arms laden with dress bags and shoeboxes. She and Clara sequestered themselves in the master bedroom, transforming it into a high-end salon. The sounds of hair dryers, excited chatter, and the rustle of expensive fabric filled the upstairs hallway. Ethan spent the morning in his office, as he usually did. He answered emails, reviewed quarterly reports from a dozen subsidiary companies, and held a brief video conference with his legal team in Zurich about a new patent acquisition. To anyone watching, he was simply Ethan Miller, the diligent consultant, whiling away a Saturday with work. No one saw the global empire he was commanding from a simple laptop in a suburban spare room. Around noon, Marcus arrived, already dressed in a tuxedo that was a size too tight, making him look like a stuffed sausage. He sauntered into Ethan's office without knocking. "Working on the big day, Miller?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe with an air of insufferable smugness. "Don't you ever take a day off?" "Oh, wait, I forgot. For some people, every day is a day off." Ethan didn't look up from his screen. "Hello, Marcus. Is there something I can help you with?" Marcus chuckled. "Nah, I'm just here to provide moral support for the ladies. It takes a village to get them ready, you know." He paused, his eyes scanning Ethan's simple attire of a polo shirt and slacks. "Speaking of getting ready, what's your plan for tonight? Still holding out for that vintage suit of yours? You might want to check the museum's closing times." Ethan finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "I have it under control, Marcus." "Right," Marcus snorted. "Under control. Listen, I get it. You don't want to go. You feel out of your depth. No shame in that. Why don't you just stay home, order a pizza, watch the game? No one will blame you. In fact," he lowered his voice conspiratorially, "we'd all probably prefer it. It would be less complicated." It was the final, condescending offer of an exit ramp, a chance for him to bow out gracefully and save them the embarrassment of his presence. "Thank you for the suggestion, Marcus," Ethan said, his voice flat, "but I wouldn't miss it for the world." Marcus shrugged, defeated in his attempt at benevolent sabotage. "Your funeral? Don't say I didn't warn you." He sauntered off toward the sounds of excitement upstairs. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Ethan remained in his office. He could hear the escalating frenzy of preparation from the rest of the house. The arrival of a makeup artist, the pop of a champagne cork, laughter, high-pitched and brittle. At 6 o'clock, Clara appeared at his office door. She was breathtaking. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald silk that shimmered as she moved. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and diamonds sparkled at her ears and throat. She was the very picture of wealth and status. She was everything her family wanted her to be. "Well," she asked, striking a pose, "what do you think?" "You look beautiful, Clara," Ethan said, and he meant it. The compliment was genuine, but it was delivered with the detached appreciation one might have for a piece of art in a museum. There was no warmth in it, no intimacy. His detachment seemed to unnerve her. She frowned, her perfectly painted lips tightening. "The limo will be here in an hour. My parents are meeting us there." She looked pointedly at his casual clothes. "You're not ready." It was an accusation. "I'm aware," he said calmly. "So what are you going to do?" she demanded, a note of hysteria creeping into her voice. The reality of the situation was finally dawning on her. Her act of destructive helpfulness was about to have a very real, very public consequence. She had expected him to panic, to rush out and buy a new suit, to capitulate. His serene inaction was more frustrating than any outburst would have been. "What about the suit?" she pressed. "The one I damaged." "It's beyond repair," he stated simply. "Then what are you going to wear, Ethan?" she cried, her voice rising. "You can't go in that." He stood up from his desk and walked toward her. For a moment she thought he was going to embrace her, to tell her it was all a joke. but he stopped a few feet away, his calm gaze holding hers. "I told you," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "I have it under control." He walked past her and went upstairs. She heard the sound of the shower running in the guest bathroom, not their master suite. The choice was small but significant. A line had been drawn. A flicker of genuine guilt, sharp and painful, finally pierced through Clara's layers of self-justification. The quiet, unshakable dignity of her husband in the face of her cruelty was beginning to look less like weakness and more like something else. Something she couldn't name. It felt like strength, a deep, formidable strength she had never seen before. A small, terrified voice in the back of her mind whispered, "What have I done?" But then she heard her mother's voice from the bedroom. "Clara, darling, does this necklace look better than the pearls?" And the moment of clarity was lost. She pushed the uncomfortable feeling down, silencing it with the familiar, comforting logic of her family. He was being difficult. He was trying to punish her for trying to help him. It was his fault, not hers. She smoothed down her silk gown, took a deep breath, and went to join her mother. The choice was made. The path was set. The storm was about to break. The limousine was a Goliath of black steel and tinted glass, its presence on their quiet suburban street both obnoxious and absurd. It purred at the curb like a caged panther. Richard had insisted on it, a conspicuous display of the status he felt he was about to officially acquire. Clara, Eleanor, and Marcus emerged from the house, a glittering procession of self-importance. They paused on the front steps, waiting. Ethan had not yet come downstairs. "Where is he?" Eleanor muttered, adjusting her fur stole. "We're going to be late." "Probably trying to staple that old suit back together," Marcus sneered, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. Clara said nothing. She stared at the closed door of the guest room at the top of the stairs. The silence from behind it was unnerving. The man she had married was predictable, steady, and gentle. The man behind that door was a stranger. Just then the door opened. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs. He was not wearing a ruined suit. He was not wearing the polo shirt and slacks from earlier. He was dressed in a tuxedo. It was not just any tuxedo. It was a masterpiece of bespoke tailoring. The jacket, a deep midnight blue that looked black in the low light, was cut from a fabric that seemed to drink the light, a silken wool that draped perfectly over his shoulders. The fit was immaculate, accentuating a lean, athletic frame that his usual, unassuming clothes had always hidden. A crisp white shirt, onyx studs, and a hand-tied bow tie completed the ensemble. He looked powerful. He looked elegant. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. Clara and her family stared, their mouths slightly agape. A stunned silence fell over the hallway. Marcus was the first to recover, his shock quickly curdling into suspicion. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Ethan descended the stairs, his movements fluid and unhurried. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked directly at Clara. "I've had it for a while," he said, his voice even. "I was saving it for a special occasion." Clara felt a blush of shame and confusion creep up her neck. He'd had this all along? This perfect, stunning suit? While she and her family had been mocking his one good suit, the cruelty of her act with the scissors was suddenly magnified 100-fold. It wasn't just destructive, it was utterly pointless. Eleanor, ever practical, recovered next. "Well, thank heavens for that," she said, her relief overriding her surprise. "You actually look presentable. Now can we please go?" Richard's voice boomed from the limousine's intercom, which the driver had activated. "What's the holdup? Let's move!" They filed out of the house. Marcus shot Ethan a final, resentful glare. Eleanor fussed over Clara's dress. As they approached the limo, Marcus held the door open for his mother and sister. He then turned to Ethan. "Look, I don't know what your game is, Miller," he hissed, "but don't think a fancy suit changes anything. You're still you. Remember your place tonight." Ethan simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, Marcus. I know exactly what my place is." Clara, already inside the limo, watched the exchange. She saw the flash of genuine malice in her brother's eyes and the unnerving calm in her husband's. The roles suddenly felt reversed. It was Marcus who seemed small and petty, and Ethan who seemed to possess an unshakable gravitas. The family settled into the plush leather seats. Richard, sitting opposite them, was already on his phone, barking orders at some unfortunate subordinate. He glanced up, gave Ethan's tuxedo an appreciative once-over, and grunted. "About time, son. See, Clara? A little pressure, and he rises to the occasion. You should listen to your old man more often." Clara didn't answer. She stared at Ethan, who had taken the seat beside her. He was looking out the window, his profile silhouetted against the passing streetlights. He seemed distant, lost in thought. He hadn't said a word to her since coming downstairs. The physical proximity between them felt like a chasm. They arrived at the Aperture Tower, a gleaming spear of glass and steel that pierced the night sky. It was a monument to innovation and power, and tonight it was lit up like a jewel. A red carpet snaked from the curb to the grand entrance, flanked by velvet ropes and swarms of photographers. The limousine pulled up, and a valet rushed to open the door. Richard stepped out first, beaming, soaking in the attention. Marcus, Eleanor, and Clara followed, a royal court attending their king. They paused for the cameras, Richard's arm possessively around his wife and daughter. Ethan was the last to exit the car. He stepped onto the curb and simply waited, his hands in his pockets, letting them have their moment. The photographer's flashes illuminated his calm, watchful face. To the family, he was an afterthought, a shadow on the edge of their spotlight. They swept past him and headed for the entrance, Richard leading the charge. "Our name is Davenport," he announced to the impeccably dressed woman holding a tablet at the door. "Richard Davenport, head table." The woman smiled politely. "Of course, Mr. Davenport. Welcome." She scanned their names off her list. As they started to move inside, she glanced past them and saw Ethan approaching. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her professional smile tightening slightly. "Can I help you?" Richard turned, an expression of immense satisfaction on his face. He had been waiting for this moment. "It's all right," he said to the woman, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "He's with me, my guest." He turned to Ethan. "They're a bit strict on the guest list, son. Lucky you tagged along with us." But as Ethan reached the checkpoint, a large, uniformed security guard stepped forward, blocking his path. The guard was built like a refrigerator, and his expression was granite. "I'm sorry, sir, your name is not on the list." Richard's smirk widened. This was even better than he had imagined. The public, gentle reinforcement of the hierarchy. He put a hand on the guard's arm. "It's fine, officer. He's my son-in-law, Miller, Ethan Miller. He's with me." The guard didn't budge. He looked at a tablet in his own hand, then back at Ethan. "I have instructions, Mr. Davenport. Mr. Miller is not to be admitted." The scene was beginning to draw attention. People in the queue behind them were murmuring. Clara's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Marcus looked triumphant. This was the natural order of things reasserting itself. "There must be some mistake," Richard boomed, his bonhomie evaporating. "I am Richard Davenport, Senior Manager of Logistics." "I know who you are, sir," the guard said, his voice flat. "My instructions are clear." Richard was about to explode. He was about to pull rank, to threaten, to make a scene that would cement his own importance. He opened his mouth to shout, but before he could utter a sound, a sharp, clear voice cut through the commotion like a diamond cutting glass. "What precisely is the meaning of this?" The voice was female, imbued with an authority that was absolute and unquestionable. It wasn't loud, but it silenced the murmuring crowd instantly. The security guard, who had been an immovable wall of muscle, snapped to attention, his posture shifting from confrontational to deferential in a heartbeat. A woman was striding toward them from the grand lobby. She was tall and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a severe but stylish knot. She wore a tailored pantsuit of charcoal gray that was more commanding than any ball gown. Her face was sharp, intelligent, and utterly uncompromising. Richard Davenport's jaw snapped shut. His face, which had been turning a dangerous shade of purple, went pale. He recognized her immediately. Everyone at Aperture, from the mailroom to the boardroom, recognized her. She was Amelia Sterling, the formidable CEO of Aperture Inc., a legend in the industry, a woman whose picture was a regular feature in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. "Ms. Sterling," Richard stammered, his voice suddenly losing all its bluster. He straightened his bow tie, a nervous, reflexive gesture. There seems to be a small mix-up with my son-in-law's invitation." Amelia Sterling's gaze, as cold and clear as a winter morning, swept past Richard as if he were a piece of furniture. She ignored Marcus, Eleanor, and the stunned, mortified Clara completely. Her eyes landed on Ethan, and the entire atmosphere of the encounter shifted. The hard, uncompromising lines of her face softened. The icy authority in her eyes was replaced by something else, a deep, profound respect. A warmth that was reserved for an equal, or perhaps even a superior. She walked directly to Ethan, stopping in front of him. The security guard discreetly stepped aside. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice now carrying a tone of personal, genuine apology. "I am so sorry. I was waiting for you in the Founders Lounge. I should have come down to greet you personally. Please, forgive the incompetence of the staff." She shot a razor-sharp glare at the head of security, who visibly flinched. The name echoed in the sudden, ringing silence. Mr. Vance. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Vance? Who was Mr. Vance? Her husband's name was Ethan Miller. She had seen his driver's license, his passport. They had filed taxes as Miller. It had to be a mistake. A bizarre, inexplicable mistake. Richard and Marcus were frozen, their faces a comical mask of confusion. They looked from the CEO to Ethan and back again, the gears in their minds grinding, trying to process this impossible new data. Ethan, who had remained perfectly calm throughout the entire ordeal, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but in the hush, it carried perfectly. "It's no trouble at all, Amelia. A slight misunderstanding." He gave her a small, gracious smile. "You know I prefer a low profile." Amelia returned the smile, an expression of shared understanding passing between them. "A preference I have always respected," she said, "but tonight is an exception. Tonight we celebrate what you built." She then turned, her formidable public persona snapping back into place like a mask. Her gaze fell upon the Davenport family, and it was like being caught in the beam of a searchlight. "Richard, Marcus," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "I don't believe you have been properly introduced to your host." She gestured, not just at Ethan, but at the entire, magnificent edifice of the Aperture Tower behind them. The gesture encompassed the building, the gala, the company, the very air they were breathing. "This is Ethan Vance," she announced, her voice ringing with a terrible, final clarity. "The founder, the architect, and the sole chairman of the board of Aperture Incorporated." She paused, letting the words land with the force of a physical blow. His company, his gala, his building. The world did not just stop for Clara Davenport, it shattered. The name Vance clicked into place with an audible, mental clang. She remembered seeing it once, years ago, in an old article about the company's mysterious, reclusive founder who had stepped away from the public eye. A genius who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire before he was 30 and then vanished, handing the reins to his hand-picked successor, Amelia Sterling. No recent photos existed. He was a ghost, a legend, and he was her husband, the man she had called unambitious, The man she had allowed her family to mock and belittle for years. The man whose only suit she had cut to pieces just a few hours ago, believing she was doing him a favor. She looked at Ethan Vance, and she saw him for the first time. The quiet patience was not weakness, it was supreme confidence. The calm demeanor was not passivity, it was absolute control. The simple life he had chosen was not a limitation, it was a deliberate, conscious choice. He hadn't been trying to climb into her world, he had invited her into his, and she had spent years complaining about the quality of the wallpaper, utterly oblivious to the fact that he owned the palace. Richard's face had gone from pale to a ghostly, bloodless white. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on the deck of a boat. Marcus was staring at Ethan with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Every snide remark, every condescending joke, every single insult he had ever leveled at Ethan was now playing back in his mind. But this time, they were not jokes. They were career suicide notes. Ethan's gaze, still calm, still so terribly, frighteningly calm, settled on Richard. He took a step forward, and Richard flinched as if he expected to be struck. "Richard," Ethan said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "We should go inside. I believe you were expecting an announcement about your promotion tonight." The words were a quiet bomb, and Clara watched as the last vestiges of her father's world, the arrogant, self-assured world he had built for himself, were blown to dust. The walk from the entrance to the main ballroom was the longest journey of Richard Davenport's life. It was a walk of shame conducted in utter silence. Amelia Sterling led the way, with Ethan at her side. They moved with the easy, confident grace of people who owned the very ground they walked on. Behind them, trailing like ghosts at a funeral, were Richard, Eleanor, Marcus, and Clara. The grand ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars hung from a vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden light over thousands of guests. An orchestra played softly on a raised stage. The air buzzed with the quiet, confident hum of the powerful and the influential. As Ethan and Amelia entered, a subtle ripple went through the room. Senior executives and board members, people Richard had only ever seen from a distance, began to approach them. They greeted Amelia with respect, but they greeted Ethan with something more. Awe, reverence. "Mr. Vance, it's an honor." "Ethan, it's been too long." "Sir, the new research campus is exceeding all projections. You were right." He was not just a founder, he was a living legend they had only ever heard stories about. And here he was, in the flesh. Richard, Marcus, and Eleanor watched, paralyzed, from the edge of the room. They were invisible. The powerful people who would have been fawning over Richard an hour ago now looked straight through him. His status, which he had always believed was inherent to his being, was revealed to be nothing more than a temporary pass, and it had just been revoked. Clara felt dizzy. The world was tilting on its axis. She watched Ethan move through the crowd. He was not the awkward, unassuming man she thought she knew. He was poised, charismatic, and brilliant. He spoke with quiet authority on topics ranging from quantum computing to global market trends. He wasn't just the king. He had built the kingdom from the ground up, stone by stone. Amelia guided Ethan toward the head table, a long, elegantly decorated table on a raised dais overlooking the entire room. It was reserved for the board of directors and the night's most honored guests. It was the table Richard had been bragging about for months. As they approached, Amelia turned to Richard, her expression arctic. "Richard, I believe this is where we part ways. Your designated table is number 142, near the back." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and escorted Ethan to his seat at the very center of the head table. Table 142. It was a deliberate, calculated insult. It was the table reserved for the most junior employees, tucked away in a corner near the service entrance. It was the table Marcus had joked about. Richard swayed on his feet. Eleanor grabbed his arm to steady him. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. They had no choice. Humiliated, they began the long, slow walk of exile across the vast ballroom, feeling the eyes of their colleagues on them. Every glance was a judgment. Every whispered comment was a nail in their social coffin. Clara didn't follow them. She stood rooted to the spot, her eyes fixed on her husband. He sat at the head table, speaking with a white-haired man she recognized as a world-famous physicist and Nobel laureate. He belonged there. He had never belonged anywhere else. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the main stage. Amelia Sterling walked to the podium. "Good evening," she began, her voice resonating through the vast space. "Welcome to the annual Aperture Gala. Tonight we are here to celebrate a year of unprecedented success. But before we do, I want to talk about something more fundamental than profit margins or market share. I want to talk about our foundation, our core principles." She paused, and her eyes found Richard, Marcus, and Eleanor, now huddled at their remote table like shipwreck survivors. Aperture was built on three pillars: innovation, ambition, and integrity, she said, her voice hardening. Innovation to change the world, ambition to push the boundaries of what is possible, and integrity, the most important pillar of all, the moral compass that guides every decision we make. It dictates that we treat every person, from our newest intern to our most senior executive, with respect. It demands that we judge people on the content of their character and the quality of their work, not on their title, their background, or the suit they wear. A camera, one of the many broadcasting the event live to Aperture employees worldwide, swiveled and zoomed in on Richard's face. His pale, sweating visage filled the massive screens on either side of the stage. A collective gasp went through the room. Clara felt her blood run cold. This was the special presentation Ethan had arranged. It was a public execution. Amelia continued, her voice like shards of ice. "It has come to my attention that some within our organization have forgotten this, that they have mistaken arrogance for ambition, that they believe their position gives them the right to demean and belittle others. This is a cancer we will not tolerate." She looked directly at Richard's magnified, horrified face on the screen. "Richard Davenport, for your years of service you have our thanks, but for your catastrophic failure of judgment and your profound lack of integrity, your employment at Aperture is terminated, effective immediately." The sentence was delivered. The axe had fallen. Richard slumped in his chair as if his spine had been removed. Eleanor let out a small, strangled sob. Marcus stared at the tablecloth, his face ashen. Amelia wasn't finished. "The same applies to any employee who shares this toxic mindset. Marcus Davenport, your position is also terminated." The camera panned to Marcus, capturing his look of utter devastation for all to see. The public humiliation was total, absolute, and meticulously orchestrated. Clara couldn't breathe. She backed away, stumbling into the shadows at the edge of the ballroom. She needed to escape. She turned and fled, pushing her way through the crowded lobby and out into the cold night air. The shame was a physical thing, clawing at her throat. She had not just married a king, she had betrayed him in the most public and unforgivable way. And his judgment, when it finally came, was as quiet, as methodical, and as devastating as the man himself. The aftermath was a brutal, cascading collapse. The news of Richard and Marcus Davenport's public firing spread through the gala like wildfire, and from there, through the entire industry. By the time the desserts were served, Richard's name had become a cautionary tale, whispered in hushed tones. His career wasn't just over, it was annihilated. He had been made an example of, a corporate Icarus whose wings of arrogance had been melted not by the sun, but by the cold, hard light of truth. After fleeing the ballroom, Clara had taken a taxi home, a frantic, tear-filled journey back to the quiet suburban house that now felt like a stage set for a life that was no longer real. She walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the photographs on the wall, the objects that constituted her marriage. They all seemed like props. The entire life she had built with Ethan was a fiction, but the lie had been hers, not his. She went upstairs to their bedroom and saw the shredded remains of his suit still lying on the bed where she had left them. It was the evidence of her crime, a monument to her spectacular, world-breaking arrogance. She sank to the floor, her emerald gown pooling around her, and wept. Not for her father, not for her brother, but for her own monumental foolishness, for the good, kind, patient man she had systematically dismantled out of sheer, blind snobbery. Back at the gala, Ethan had accepted the termination of the Davenports with the same unnerving calm he had displayed all evening. There was no triumph in his eyes, no flicker of satisfaction. There was only a quiet, somber finality. This was not revenge. It was a rebalancing, a correction of the moral ledger. When the official program concluded, he was approached by dozens of people, but he kept his conversations brief. His work for the evening was done. Amelia found him near the exit, where he was shrugging into a fine wool overcoat that had been waiting for him. "The car is ready for you, Mr. Vance," she said quietly. "It will take you to the penthouse." The penthouse, the magnificent multi-story apartment at the very top of the Aperture Tower, with panoramic views of the entire city, a place he had designed but had rarely used, preferring the quiet anonymity of his suburban life. "Thank you, Amelia," he said, "for everything." "It was my honor, Ethan," she replied, her professional demeanor softening once more. "Though I confess I took a certain satisfaction in delivering the news to Davenport. He was a pompous fool." Ethan nodded, a flicker of weariness in his eyes. He was, but his greatest failing was not his pomposity. It was that he taught his daughter to value the same empty things he did. He looked out at the city lights, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Send my things from the house in the morning, Amelia. All of them. And have the legal team begin the paperwork." "Divorce?" she asked gently. "A separation of assets," he corrected, his voice precise. "There was nothing shared to be divorced from. It seems our marriage was a unilateral investment, and it has matured." The days that followed were a blur of quiet, efficient dismantling. Ethan did not return to the house. Movers arrived the next morning, packing his books, his clothes, his computer, and the contents of his office with quiet, professional speed. They left behind everything he had bought with Clara. The house felt hollowed out, its soul extracted. Richard and Eleanor were forced to put their ostentatious house on the market immediately. Without Richard's massive salary and bonuses, they couldn't afford the mortgage. The news of his public disgrace made him unemployable. No company wanted to hire a man who had become a poster child for corporate hubris. They downsized to a small condo in a less fashionable part of town, the fall from grace swift and brutal. Marcus, jobless and humiliated, moved back in with them. His smug confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. The family that had been held together by the glue of shared arrogance now began to crack and splinter under the pressure of shared failure. Clara was left alone in the empty house, the silence a constant, screaming reminder of her loss. Her father called, blaming her. "This is your fault. You married him. You couldn't control him." Her mother called, weeping, lamenting the loss of her social standing. Her brother didn't call at all. A week after the gala, a courier delivered a thick envelope to her door. It contained divorce papers. They were simple, straightforward, and devastatingly generous. Ethan was not seeking to punish her financially. He was giving her the house, a substantial alimony for a transitional period, and a portfolio of investments that would ensure she was never destitute. It was not the act of a vengeful man. It was the act of a man closing a ledger. He was settling an account, not a score. The generosity was, in its own way, the cruelest cut of all. It proved that this was never about money. It was about respect. and in that she had been utterly bankrupt. She was left with the shell of a life, paid for by the man whose soul she had so casually dismissed. The man she had tried to humiliate was now her benefactor, his quiet dignity a stark and painful contrast to her family's noisy collapse. She was alone, adrift in a sea of consequences of her own making. 3 weeks after the gala, Clara sat in a sterile, impersonal lawyer's office. The divorce papers were spread out on the polished table in front of her, their legalistic language a cold and formal epitaph for her marriage. Her lawyer, a brisk, efficient woman named Ms. Albright, had just finished explaining the settlement. "It's more than generous, Mrs. Miller," Ms. Albright said, her tone a mixture of professional admiration and personal curiosity. "In fact, it's one of the most generous unilateral settlements I've ever seen. He's essentially giving you your entire shared life, free and clear, and providing for your future. Are you sure you don't want to contest anything?" Clara shook her head, her throat tight. "No, there's nothing to contest." She looked at the signature line, waiting for her name. Ethan had already signed. His signature, Ethan Vance, was bold and clear, a stark contrast to the unassuming Ethan Miller she was used to. "I need to see him," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. Ms. Albright sighed. "His legal team has been very clear. Mr. Vance wishes for all communication to go through us. He does not want direct contact." "Please," Clara begged, the single word costing her the last of her pride. "Just a meeting. 10 minutes. I won't contest anything. I won't ask for more. I need to speak to him." Perhaps it was the desperation in her voice, or perhaps Ms. Albright saw a potential complication that a short meeting could resolve. She made a call. There was a long, hushed conversation. Finally, she hung up. "He has agreed," she said, her expression surprised. "Tomorrow, noon, at the Aperture Tower." The next day, Clara stood in the magnificent, cathedral-like lobby of the building she had last fled in shame. She was dressed simply in a plain black dress, a stark contrast to the emerald silk she had worn on the night of the gala. She felt small and insignificant. A quiet, professional assistant met her and led her to a private elevator. It ascended silently with breathtaking speed. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into an apartment. It was the penthouse. The space was stunning, a minimalist masterpiece of glass, steel, and warm wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 180-degree view of the city, stretching out to the horizon. The furniture was sparse but exquisite, each piece a work of art. This was Ethan's real home. The suburban house she had shared with him felt like a child's playhouse in comparison. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. He wore simple gray trousers and a soft cashmere sweater. He turned as she entered, and his eyes met hers. There was no anger in them, no hatred. There was only a profound, bottomless sadness. "Hello, Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "Ethan," she began, her own voice trembling. I don't know what to say." "There's nothing you need to say," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "The papers are clear. You will be well taken care of." "That's not why I came," she said, taking a hesitant step forward. "The money. I don't care about the money." The words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Hadn't her entire life been about money and status? "I know you don't," he said, and the sadness in his eyes deepened. "That's the tragedy of it. You don't care about money. You care about the appearance of it, the status it confers, the approval it gets from people like your father." Tears began to stream down her face. "I was a fool. I was so blind. I let their poison get into my head. I was so insecure, so desperate for their approval. I never stopped to think for myself. I am so sorry, Ethan." He listened patiently, his expression unchanging. He did not rush to comfort her. He did not offer forgiveness. He simply let her speak. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by her quiet sobs. He finally spoke, and his words were not a condemnation, but a diagnosis. They were the quiet bomb that would obliterate the last of her hope. Clara, this was never about the insults. It wasn't about the jokes from Marcus or the condescension from your father. I could have endured that. I have endured worse. This was about you. He took a step closer and she flinched. I hid who I was because I wanted to be loved for the man I am, not the name I carry or the company I built. I wanted a partner who saw me. You never did. You saw a project, a fixer-upper, a man who wasn't good enough for your family's standards. He gestured vaguely around the magnificent apartment. All of this, he said, his voice filled with a weary sorrow, it was worthless to me if I couldn't share it with someone who valued the person, not the penthouse. He looked directly into her eyes. You stood by day after day, and you watched them diminish me. You chose their performance of status over my dignity. You didn't just fail to defend your husband, you actively participated in his humiliation. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but each word was a perfectly aimed dart. You cut up my suit, Clara. You thought you were destroying my only chance to fit in with your world. But all you were really destroying was the last thread of the man who loved you. You destroyed us. He turned back to the window. The settlement is fair. It's not a punishment. It's a consequence. It is the closing of a failed investment. I am severing my losses and moving on. I suggest you do the same. The finality in his voice was absolute. There was no room for appeal. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. She had been judged, not by a vengeful king, but by a deeply wounded man who had finally chosen to protect his own heart. She understood then that her apology, no matter how sincere, was irrelevant. The damage was too deep. The trust was not just broken, it had been methodically ground into dust by her own hands. She turned and walked back to the elevator, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As the doors slid shut, she saw him one last time, a solitary figure against the vast cityscape, a king in his castle, utterly and completely alone. 6 months passed. The city moved from the crispness of autumn into the cold, stark clarity of winter. The seasons changed, and with them, the lives of everyone involved in the night of the gala. Ethan Vance threw himself back into his work, but with a new purpose. He emerged from the shadows he had so long inhabited. His face, once a mystery, was now on the cover of magazines, not as a billionaire recluse, but as a visionary leader. He stepped back into the public role of chairman of Aperture, guiding the company with a renewed sense of direction. He also launched the Vance Foundation, a massive philanthropic endeavor dedicated to funding education for underprivileged students and providing grants for young entrepreneurs who lack connections in capital. The foundation's motto, prominently displayed on its website, was simple: worth is measured by character, not by circumstance. He was taking the pain of his experience and transforming it into an engine for positive change. He was seen at charity events, at university lectures, at groundbreaking ceremonies. He was still quiet, still thoughtful, but there was a new light in his eyes. He was healing. He was building again. For the Davenports, the fall was as complete as it was swift. Richard, unable to find work in a city that now saw him as a laughingstock, was forced into early retirement. His days were spent in their small condo, watching financial news on television, a bitter, angry man railing against a world that had, in his view, unfairly cast him out. He never once admitted his own fault. It was always someone else's: Ethan's deception, Amelia's treachery, Clara's weakness. Eleanor's social life had evaporated. The friends who had once flocked to her lavish parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Her identity had been so entwined with her husband's status that without it, she simply faded. Marcus drifted from one low-level job to another, his resentment a palpable aura around him. Stripped of his father's name and influence, he discovered he had very few skills of his own. The world, he found, was not impressed by his smug sense of entitlement. And Clara signed the divorce papers and the house was officially hers. For a few weeks, she rattled around in it, a ghost in her own life. But the silence and the memories were too much. She sold the house, a place that held nothing but the shame of her choices. She also liquidated the investment portfolio Ethan had given her. She put most of a staggering sum of money into a trust, then donated the rest to a local women's shelter, an anonymous act of penance. She moved into a small, simple apartment in a quiet, working-class neighborhood on the other side of the city. She took a job, not a glamorous one. She became an administrative assistant at a small nonprofit that helped people find affordable housing. The pay was modest, the work was hard, but for the first time in her life, it was real. She learned the value of a dollar earned through her own effort. She learned to listen to people's stories, to feel empathy not as a social grace, but as a genuine human connection. Her colleagues knew nothing of her past life. They knew her only as Clara Miller, a quiet, kind, and incredibly diligent woman who was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. One afternoon, while waiting for the bus, she saw Ethan's face on the cover of a magazine at a newsstand. The headline read, "Ethan Vance, the man who is rebuilding the American dream." He was smiling, and it was a genuine smile, warm and confident. He looked happy. She felt a pang in her chest, a familiar ache of regret. But it was different now. It was no longer the sharp, agonizing pain of loss, but a dull, quiet sorrow. A recognition of a great and beautiful thing she had been given and had been too blind to appreciate. She didn't resent his happiness. In a strange way, she was glad for it. He deserved it. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. True worth, the kind that endures, has nothing to do with a suit or a title or a house on a hill. It's not about the approval of others. It's about integrity. It's about the quiet strength to be dignified, kind, and true, especially when no one is watching. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and respect the person you see. It had taken losing everything for her to finally understand what was truly valuable. The bus arrived. She got on, found a seat, and looked out the window as the city slid by. She was on her way home, to her small apartment, to a life she was building for herself, one honest day at a time. The road to redemption was long, and she was only at the beginning. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time: hope. And so, our story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that the respect we crave from others must first be found within ourselves. That patience and integrity often wield a power far greater than arrogance and pride. The loudest person in the room is often the weakest. What do you think? Was Ethan's response justified, or was it too harsh? Could Clara ever truly earn forgiveness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's a complicated situation, and I'm genuinely curious to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story and it resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more tales of justice, redemption, and the surprising strength of the human spirit. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, remember to value the things that truly matter.